Good afternoon, listeners. Today we have a special guest, Chris Hipkins, Prime Minister and Labour Party leader. Welcome to the airwaves of Radio Apna.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thanks for coming in. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling so much better, actually. I had COVID-19 last week, but I've made a full recovery, so it's great to be back on the campaign trail again.
Early voting has started and we are 7 days out from the election date. How's the campaign going?
I think the campaign's really picking up momentum. We had a slower start to the campaign. It's been a tough year for New Zealanders, but I think in the last week or two we've really sort of picked up a positive vibe around Labour and a real momentum building behind our campaign. So I'm very, very optimistic about what the final week of the campaign's going to hold for us.
Chris, Labour's campaign slogan is "In it for you." What's the message here for the Kiwis and their families?
I want New Zealand families who are working hard, who are trying hard to create a better life for themselves and for their families. I want them to know that I'm in this for them. I want them to know that I've got their back, that I want them to be able to see the benefits of the hard work that they're putting in so that their lives actually are improving and so that they're creating a better future for their children.
You have unveiled 9-point personal commitments to the Kiwis.
Indeed.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Yeah, sure. Look, I set out a 9-point pledge card because I think that people want to know when they're voting, what are the bottom lines? What are you actually going to deliver? What are the main things that if they give us, their vote, that they'll actually see change as a result of that. So free dental care for the under 30s with a goal ultimately over time to extend dental care to being free for everybody. Taking GST off fruit and vegetables. Expanding apprenticeship opportunities. These are things that for me are so vitally important to our work as a government that I've put them on a pledge card because I've said that, look, these are my commitments that I'm making to you. If we're re-elected, these are the things that we will absolutely do.
National released their taxation policy and has admitted only 3,000 households will get the full $250 a fortnight tax cut. What are the key points of difference in Labour and National's taxation policy?
The National Party have been trying to swindle New Zealand with their tax policies. I think when Kiwis do the maths and they work out what they will pay more in order to get National's tax cut, they'll actually find that many families will be worse off as a result. So National want to cut free and half price public transport for young people. They want to cut the free prescriptions that we've put in place that will make it more expensive and more difficult for people to get their medicine. They want to sell $5 billion of New Zealand homes to overseas investors every year in order to pay for their tax plans. Economists have actually come out and said that interest rates will stay higher for longer. So for everyone with a mortgage, interest rates will stay higher for longer under National's economic plan. So I think when Kiwis break it down, they're going to figure out that actually if National wins, they're going to lose. Labor's put forward a cost of living plan that's about targeted support here and now. So taking GST off fruit and vegetables, keeping public transport free for under 13s, half price for the under 25s, free dental care for the under 30s with a goal of expanding that over time. $25 extra a week in working for families for those who get the in-work tax credit. These things will make a tangible difference to families, but not in a way that's going to push up interest rates, which National's plan will ultimately do. And people can see, that we will deliver what we've talked about. National's plan just doesn't stack up, and I think it's now abundantly clear to everybody that, the National Party just haven't been truthful with what the true cost of their plan is.
Cost of living, supermarket duopoly, and windfall profits by international banks, oil companies are talking points. What measures have been taken to help families with cost of living?
One of the things that I did when I was Prime Minister was when I first became Prime Minister, was extend the fuel tax discount for another few months to support New Zealanders through that peak in inflation. Number one thing you do in an inflation crisis or cost of living crisis is get inflation back down again so that the costs don't continue to grow. And we're winning that battle. It's a slow battle because inflation's been high around the world. But we're now at the point where wages are starting to grow again faster than inflation. Inflation's coming back down. That means that families will finally be able to catch up again. But we can't afford to see big stimulus, which is what National are proposing, that will actually ultimately mean inflation stays higher.
Crime, especially ram rates, youth offending, And scams are also talking points among all sectors of our population. Over the decades, we have witnessed what I call cyclic offending associated with drugs, gangs, organized crime, and what I call money laundering. Where are the innovative ideas and pathways to engage all parties to respond appropriately, especially to youth offending?
You're right that crime, there is a cyclical nature to some patterns of criminal offending, and we're at a particular point in a cycle around youth offending at the moment, particularly around things like retail crime and ram raiding. I think we need to just take a step back and say, first of all, ram raiding's utterly unacceptable. And if it's your home, it's your workplace that's being ram raided, that's a traumatic experience, and it shouldn't happen. You should never be in that position in the first place. So how are we going to stop it from happening? We've got to actually look at the lives of the young kids who are involved in this. Some of these kids, I think the youngest child picked up in a ram raid was 8 years old. That's just unacceptable. These kids deserve a better life than that. So when I became Minister of Police middle of last year, I said to the police, tell me who these kids are. They gave me a list of 96 repeat ram raiders. 90% of those live in a household with a parent who's either been in prison or has been otherwise involved in the corrections system. So we've got to turn these kids' lives around. So I put in place a fast-track program to turn these kids' lives around. 75% of those kids that were referred to that haven't reoffended. Now, that still means that a quarter of them have, but 3/4 of them haven't. So that's a good success story. Now we've got to focus on the quarter who have continued to reoffend and make sure that we're dealing with them as well. But as a result of that, we've actually seen ram raiding offending going down. One ram raid is a ram raid too many, as far as I'm concerned. But simply talking about being tough on crime isn't going to actually stop anything. Actually dealing with it and figuring out why are these kids getting in trouble in the first place, that's what's going to actually make a difference.
That brings me to the associated questions of what I call intergeneration dependency, disengagement, and the associated social issues. How can we break this cycle and restore dignity and purpose in people's lives?
Look, I think we've again, a lot of it comes back to education and getting better equitable outcomes out of our education system. As Minister of Education, one of the first things I did was we hosted some summits around the country to understand what wasn't going well in our education system. And there are significant proportions of our community that are being underserved by our education system at the moment. So we've started a whole program of reform to turn that around. COVID-19, of course, got in the middle of all of that. And for about 3 years, the reform programs slowed down or even stalled for much of that time. But that's because schools were, frankly, on a day-to-day basis, just focused on getting from one day to the next. We're now back at that point where we can actually, I think, start to get back into that again now. And we can say what's been happening with education isn't good enough. And those young people who are not achieving in education, we do need to change the system so that they are.
There has been obvious challenges in recent years. And we had a global COVID pandemic, global crisis of inflation, supply chain disruption, and labor shortages. At home, we had Christchurch mosque shooting, White Island eruption, and in recent months, severe impact of floods and cyclones. How has the government managed this series of unprecedented challenges?
I think we've managed them very well. Every one of those has been just a phenomenal challenge. The global pandemic was probably the biggest challenge any New Zealand government's faced in any of our lifetimes. And I think we managed New Zealand very well through that. And I think we created a collective sense of purpose, which meant that New Zealanders were willing to do what we were asking them to do. And the result of that is that we had one of the lowest death rates from COVID-19 of any country in the world. And so I'm very proud of what we were able to do there. One of the things I know about being Prime Minister is you never quite know what you're going to face from one day to the next. And so your values are really important. And I think the Labour Party's values have proven to be the right values for the time that we live in.
What has been the key achievements of the Labour administration? Any missed opportunities and could have done better?
I never will claim perfection, but I do believe that we've made progress on a whole lot of challenges and problems that we inherited when we became the government back in 2017. So we've lifted 77,000 Kiwi children out of poverty. We've built 13,000 new public homes where the previous government was selling them off. We have been rebuilding our schools and our hospitals that were badly run down. We've got thousands more teachers, doctors and nurses in our public service than we previously have. I think those things in time, we will see that that's going to make a huge difference. On climate change, one of the preeminent challenges facing humanity, we've actually got New Zealand's emissions reducing year on year, and they have been for 3 years in a row. We've got to continue to make progress on those things. I think the job of good government is never done. I'm not campaigning to be elected for a first full term as Prime Minister because I think everything's perfect. Far from it. I'm campaigning to say I want a full term as Prime Minister because I think there's still some big challenges ahead, and I think I've got some answers to them.
New Zealand has a growing and influential South Asian and Indo-Fijian diaspora. If re-elected, what's the prospect for more enhanced and what I call strategic economic, trade and bilateral engagement with India and Fiji?
I think the potential for an enhanced relationship between New Zealand and India in particular is immense. And I think our relationship with Fiji is certainly strengthening and improving as well. And I want to continue to make sure we make progress on that. I had a really constructive and warm meeting with Prime Minister Modi at Papua New Guinea earlier in the year. And he invited me to visit India. I've said that I'll do that within 100 days of the new government being formed, should we win this coming election, because I do think that relationship between New Zealand and India just has so much potential.
Recent polls indicate a national act would need New Zealand First to form a government. What's your take on this?
I think a National Act New Zealand First government would be disastrous for New Zealand. It would be chaotic. They wouldn't be able to agree on much. And New Zealand First and ACT in particular in this election have been playing some very divisive politics. So my message to every Kiwi out there listening to this is, if you want a government that actually is focused on taking New Zealand forward, if you don't want the politics of division and fear that we're seeing from, the potential National Act New Zealand First coalition, then give your party vote to Labour.
The political landscape is changing by the day. What possible governance arrangements are there?
Ultimately, this election is going to boil down to two options. There's a National Act New Zealand First coalition, which I think would be a disaster for the country. It would be divisive. It would take New Zealand backwards. And it would mean that a lot of New Zealanders would lose out. Or there is a government led by Labour, which could include the Greens, it could include the Māori Party. And I think that that's a government that will continue to take New Zealand forward. So I'm asking people to give their party vote to Labour, because I do think we've got answers to the problems the country's facing. And unlike our opponents, they're not just slogans, they're actually well thought through, developed ideas.
Should New Zealand become a republic?
I think in time New Zealand will become a republic, but I don't think there's any burning need for it right now. I think if you look at the role of the monarchy in New Zealand, it's pretty much just a ceremonial role now, and it actually works reasonably effectively. I think in time, we'll continue to head towards being more of a republic, but I just don't sense that there's any great rush or sense of urgency around that, because what we've got at the moment's working pretty well.
Chris, any final words for our audience?
Elections matter, and this election's going to matter an enormous amount. Decisions in elections get made by people who show up at the ballot box, and I really would encourage everybody in the New Zealand community to make sure you get out there and vote. You've got a whole nother week to do it. We go to the polls. Polls will be almost closing this time next week. So 7 p.m. next Saturday night, the polls will close. I'd really encourage you to get out there and vote. Make sure that you actually have your say on the future of this country. It's a fantastic country. We've got so much opportunity in front of us. And I think such a positive future ahead of us as a country. That's why I'm asking New Zealanders to vote for me, Chris Hipkins, and the Labour Party, so that I get a full term as Prime Minister. I've been doing this for about 6 months before the campaign began. And I feel like I'm just getting started. I think I've got a lot to offer New Zealand.
Thank you for joining us on Radio Apna.
Thank you.
Chris.